She stole the $5 million bet money and donated it to the hospital treating her sister. Lorenzo woke up thinking he still controlled the game, until his accountant called in a panic. The Geneva holding account was empty. The illegal money from the bet had vanished. Not into Clara's pocket, but into Mercy Hospital's pediatric oncology wing. Overnight, Chicago called Lorenzo a hero. The press praised his generosity, and he could not reclaim a single cent without exposing the ugly truth behind the donation. Clara had not just stolen his money, but his blood money in public, and used his own reputation as the lock on the cage. People think the mob is all bullets, blood, and bodies in the dark. But some hits do not touch the skin at all. They go straight for a person's pride. Lorenzo Costa, the undisputed king of Chicago's underworld, thought marrying Clara, a quiet plus-sized girl from the South Side, would be nothing more than the punchline to a $5 million poker bet. He thought he had bought someone small, someone grateful, someone too scared to fight back. He was wrong, because Clara did not stay the joke forever. One night, after hearing exactly what he thought of her, she wiped her tears, stood up, and began turning his own empire against him. It all started at the Pendleton Club, a discreet mansion of old money and dangerous men near Chicago's Gold Coast. The Pendleton Club was a place for old money, expensive bourbon, and men who had built fortunes from other people's fear. It was a freezing Tuesday night in November, with bitter wind rolling off Lake Michigan and cutting through wool coats like knives. Inside the velvet-lined private poker room, the air was heavy with Cuban cigar smoke and the quiet clink of crystal glasses. Lorenzo Costa sat at the head of the table. At 34, he was already the boss of the city's Italian syndicate, a man with the discipline of a corporate CEO and the instincts of someone who had survived the streets. Across from him sat Declan Gallagher, the loud, reckless leader of the Irish faction from Canaryville. The two crime bosses were supposed to be at peace, held together by a fragile truce over territory, but everyone in that room could feel how thin that peace really was. They were playing poker, but the real game was pride. That was when Clara Higgins entered the room. At 24, she looked exhausted in a cheap white catering uniform that fit badly and made her feel even more exposed. Clara worked for a high-end catering company that served the city's richest criminals without asking questions. She was not even supposed to be in that VIP room, an extra shift because her little sister Sophie was fighting leukemia at Mercy Hospital, and every overtime hour mattered. Clara kept her eyes down, her dark hair twisted into a messy bun, both hands steadying a heavy silver tray of expensive scotch. She had learned to move quietly around rich men, to be useful without being noticed. As she leaned down to replace Declan Gallagher's glass, one of his men burst into a loud, barking laugh. Clara flinched. Her elbow brushed the back of Declan's chair. The tray tilted, and a splash of 25-year-old scotch hit the cuff of his custom Tom Ford suit. The room went silent. Clara froze, her face burning. "I'm so sorry." "Sir," she stammered, reaching into her apron for a linen napkin. "Get your hands off me, you clumsy cow," Declan hissed, yanking his arm away. He looked her up and down with open disgust. "Jesus, are they hiring whales to serve drinks now? Or have you been eating all the appetizers in the kitchen, sweetheart?" His Irish crew burst into cruel laughter. Clara stood there with the napkin in her hand, unable to move. Tears stung her eyes, but she swallowed them down because crying in front of men like that only fed them. Lorenzo Costa did not laugh. He sat still, turning a heavy silver poker chip between his fingers, his cold gaze moving from Declan's stained sleeve to Clara's shaking hands. "Take it easy, Declan," Lorenzo said, his smooth baritone quieting the room. "It's a drop of whiskey. Don't to take it out on the help." Declan sneered and leaned back, wiping at his sleeve. The liquor had made him careless. "You always were too polished, Costa. Always pretending you re better than the rest of us." His eyes glittered with mean, drunken amusement. "Tell you what, since you love charity so much, I'll bet you $5 million you would to take a fat pig like that out in public. Hell, I'll bet you $5 million you wouldn't even marry her." The room went so quiet that Clara could hear the air conditioner humming above them. Even Declan's own men looked uneasy. glancing between their drunken boss and the Italian Don. This was not just an insult to a working girl. It was a direct challenge to Lorenzo's authority. Clara stood frozen, clutching the silver tray against her chest like a shield. $5 million. To them, she was not a person with bills, fears, a sick sister, or a life she was trying to hold together. She was a dare, a prop, something two powerful men could toss between them for sport. Lorenzo's expression did not change. He did not look at Clara with pity. He studied Declan, calculating the room. And weakness in their world could get a man killed. In Lorenzo's world, reputation mattered more than comfort, more than decency, sometimes more than life itself. He stopped spinning the chip and pressed it flat against the green felt. The sharp sound cut through the silence. "You reon," Lorenzo said coldly. $5 million. Wire it to my offshore account, and I'll have the marriage certificate on your desk by Friday. Clara felt all the warmth leave her body. The silver tray slipped from her hands and crashed onto the hardwood floor. No one moved. No one apologized. Without another word, she turned and ran from the room, Declan's laughter following her all the way down the service elevator. The next morning, Clara was fired. The catering manager barely looked at her. He handed her a thin envelope with a small severance check and told her to clear out her locker before lunch. Later that day, Clara sat on the edge of her bed in her tiny Logan Square apartment, staring at overdue medical bills spread across the blanket. Sophie's hospital bracelet was still in her coat pocket from the night before. Clara held it until the plastic bent in her fingers. Then a heavy knock shook the door. Expecting her angry landlord, she opened it and found a massive man in a tailored charcoal suit. It was Matteo Rossi, Lorenzo's personal enforcer. "Clara Higgins," he said, polite but impossible to refuse. "Mr. Costa wants to speak with you." Clara was sitting in a glass-walled office on the 42nd floor of Costa Enterprises. Far below, Chicago glittered like it had no idea how badly people were suffering inside it. Lorenzo Costa sat behind an enormous mahogany desk, reading a file. He did not look up when she entered. "Sit," he said. Clara perched on the edge of a leather chair, clutching her cheap purse with both hands. Lorenzo closed the folder and finally lifted his eyes to her. In daylight, he seemed even more intimidating. His jaw was shadowed with stubble, and his eyes were calm, flat, unreadable. "I'll keep this brief. Miss Higgins," he said, "I need a wife for a temporary public arrangement. For exactly 1 year." Lorenzo added. Clara stared at him. "You want to marry me because of that horrible bet last night." His expression hardened. "What happened last night created a problem. This is the solution." He slid a thick, leather-bound contract across the desk. "This is a non-disclosure agreement and a marriage contract. You will be my legal wife for 365 days. You will live at my estate in Lake Forest and attend public events with me. You will not ask questions about my business. You will stay out of my private life." Clara's voice shook. "Why me? You could choose anyone." Lorenzo looked at her like the answer was obvious. "Because you reconvenient." The word landed harder than Clara wanted it to. Lorenzo slid another sheet of paper across the desk. It was a bank statement, followed by hospital records. "I know about your sister Sophie," he said. "I know the insurance company denied part of her treatment. I know you've been working double shifts and still falling behind." Clara's throat tightened. He had dug through her life as if it were another file on his desk. "Sign this, and her bills are handled today. The best specialists available will be flown in tomorrow. When the year is over, you walk away with $2 million, tax-free." Clara stared at the paper. $2 million. Sophie's treatment. A way out of debt. All tied to a man who saw her as a transaction. Lorenzo did not soften. He looked at her the way a man might look at a necessary purchase he did not enjoy making. But when Clara closed her eyes, all she saw was Sophia's pale face in that sterile hospital bed, trying to smile so Clara would not worry. In bookkeeping classes at night once, back when she still believed life might leave room for plans, she knew exactly what those bills meant. She knew what would happen if she refused. Her hand shook as she picked up the heavy gold pen and signed her name. Lorenzo took the contract back without a word. "Matteo will help you pack," he said. "The wedding is at 2. By afternoon, they were married in a back room at City Hall. There were no flowers, no music, no white dress. Clara wore her tight navy suit and felt like a stranger watching someone else's life happen. Lorenzo wore a custom black suit that cost more than she had earned in years. Matteo stood in the corner as the only witness. The judge, clearly paid to be quick and quiet, rushed through the vows as if reading a receipt. When they were pronounced husband and wife, Lorenzo did not kiss her. He did not even touch her hand. He checked his Rolex, nodded to the judge, and walked out first. Within hours, the story reached the press. They called it a modern Cinderella romance. Behind closed doors, it felt nothing like a fairy tale. The moment they stepped inside his dark Gothic estate in Lake Forest, Lorenzo told her the rules. Her wing was on the east side. His was on the west. She was not to disturb him. She was not to wait up. Then he handed her over to Mrs. Gable, a housekeeper with a face so stern it seemed carved from stone, and disappeared into the mansion. Clara stood on the cold marble floor with one small suitcase, finally understanding what she had signed away. It was not only her name on a marriage certificate, it was her space, her voice, and some part of her dignity, handed to a man who had not once asked how she felt. The first 3 months were quiet in the worst possible way. Lorenzo kept his part of the bargain. Sophia's medical debt disappeared almost immediately, and the relief of that was so enormous it sometimes made Clara cry in private. The new doctors came, the treatment plan changed, and Sophie sounded stronger each time Clara called her. That was the only thing keeping Clara from breaking, because inside the estate she barely existed. Lorenzo left before sunrise and returned long after midnight. And they did sit across from each other in the echoing dining room. The silence felt thick enough to choke on. He was not openly cruel. He was worse than that. He was polite, distant, and completely absent. The staff noticed, and they followed his lead. The maids whispered in Italian when Clara passed. The cook served her last, sometimes cold. Her clothes came back from the laundry shrunken, faded, or with missing buttons. It was small, petty cruelty. But small things can wear a person down when they come every day. Clara was terrified of violating the contract and risking Sophia's care, so she swallowed everything. She spent her days in the gardens, in the library, or at Sophia's bedside when Matteo allowed the trip. She ate to quiet the loneliness, then hated herself for it. By winter, she had gained weight and lost nearly all the confidence she had left. Then came the Solstice Gala at the Drake Hotel, where Chicago's high society gathered to smile beside dangerous men. A stylist squeezed Clara into a heavy dark green velvet dress that made her feel upholstered instead of dressed. At the gala, Lorenzo played the devoted husband for the cameras, keeping one firm hand on her back and giving the press exactly what they wanted. When the flashes stopped, his hand disappeared. So did he. Clara was left beneath the sharp eyes of polished women, who looked her over, then looked through her. She escaped to a dark balcony to breathe. Outside, the cold hit her face like mercy. She stood near a stone partition, blinking back tears when she heard men step outside on the other side. A cigar flared in the dark. Then came Declan Gallagher's voice. "I have to hand it to you, Costa," Declan said, laughing through the smoke. "I didn't think you'd actually do it. 3 months, and you still haven't suffocated under that cow." Clara froze, her back pressed against the cold stone. Lorenzo's voice followed, low and sharp. "Watch your mouth, Declan. Give me $5 million. I expect the wire by Monday." Declan laughed harder, asking how Lorenzo could stand having that frumpy eyesore wandering around his perfect estate. To him, her life had become entertainment. Clara pressed one hand against her stomach. She had known the marriage was cold. She had known it was an arrangement, but she had not understood the depth of the joke until that moment. Declan kept mocking him, saying the great Lorenzo Costa had chained himself to a whale just to win a bet. Clara covered her mouth before a sob could escape. Part of her still waited for Lorenzo to say something human, something that proved he had not meant all of it. His answer came flat and almost bored. He said she served her purpose, and the attention helped soften his public image. He called her harmless, a prop. He said she stayed out of his way, and when the year ended, he would pay her off, send her back where she came from, and walk away richer. Then the glasses clinked. The sound was small, but it broke something open inside her. After Declan called him a genius, the two men went back inside, leaving Clara alone on the balcony. She slid down the cold stone pillar until she was sitting on the floor. Her green velvet dress gathered around her. Her makeup ran down her cheeks. For a while, she could not even think clearly. It was not only the bet. It was every silent dinner, every ruined dress, every whisper from the staff. Every morning she had told herself to endure one more day for Sophie. All of it had been built on humiliation. She cried until her chest hurt. Then, slowly, the tears stopped. The pain did not disappear. It changed shape. It became something sharper. Anger settled into Clara with a strange, steady calm. Lorenzo thought she was harmless. Declan thought she was beneath them. They all believed she would take the money, lower her head, and vanish once the contract ended. Clara wiped the mascara from her cheeks with the back of her hand and looked out at the Chicago skyline glowing beyond the balcony. She thought of Sophie fighting for her life without ever giving up. She thought of the night classes she had quit because bills came first. She thought of every invoice, every seating chart, every account number she had ever memorized, because no one else bothered to respect the work. By morning, Clara had made a decision. She would not run. She would learn. Not go to the kitchen for pastries, and she did not hide in the library. She made 3 phone calls. The first was to Sophie's doctor to confirm every bill had truly been paid. The second was to an old community college instructor, who still remembered how quickly Clara could understand ledgers. The third was to a discreet private agency that trained the wealthy and terrified. "My name is Clara Costa," she said. "I need a nutritionist, a private trainer, a stylist, and someone who can teach me advanced financial analysis. They come to the East Wing tomorrow at 5. No one can know." Her golden cage was about to become a classroom, a gym, and a war room. The team arrived before dawn through the guarded back entrance, each of them bound by expensive non-disclosure agreements Clara barely slept after reading. In the physical training was Colin Pierce, a former British Special Forces operative, who now worked for celebrities and men with enemies. He did not flatter her. He measured, corrected, pushed, and refused to let her confuse pain with failure. Dr. Eris Sterling, a severe nutritionist with no patience for comfort eating, replaced Clara's pastries with strict meals that still kept her strong enough to function. And twice a week, Professor Elaine Mercer, the instructor Clara had once admired, slipped in with case studies, balance sheets, and corporate filings. Clara was not becoming someone else. She was rebuilding the parts of herself she had buried. The first month was ugly. Clara threw up in the manicured bushes after sprint drills. Her muscles burned, her knees ached, and some mornings she had to sit on the bathroom floor before she could stand. At night, she worked through financial exercises until the numbers blurred. More than once, she cried over a spreadsheet because she was tired, angry, and ashamed of how far she had let herself disappear. But whenever she wanted to quit, she heard Declan laughing on that balcony. She heard Lorenzo calling her a prop. Then she opened the book again, lifted the weight again, walked 1 more mile. The change did not happen overnight. That was what made it real. By the 4th month, it could no longer be denied. Weight came off slowly, then steadily. Her face sharpened, but more importantly, her posture changed. She stopped moving as if she were apologizing for taking up space. To hide the transformation, Clara wore loose silk pants, oversized sweaters, and soft robes whenever the staff was nearby. Lorenzo noticed almost nothing. He was trapped in a worsening turf war with Declan's crew, spending nights at the docks or locked in his study, trying to keep the FBI and his own nervous allies away from his door. On the rare evenings he passed Clara in the hall, he looked exhausted enough to miss the obvious. Still, once or twice his eyes lingered, not with affection, not yet, more like confusion, as if something about the room had shifted and he could not name it. Clara noticed that too. She noticed everything now. Genevieve Dupont arrived in the 5th month, a Parisian social strategist with a soft voice and a merciless eye. While Kaylin rebuilt Clara's body and Elaine sharpened her financial instincts, Genevieve taught her how rooms worked, how long to hold eye contact, when to speak softly, when silence made people nervous, how high society hid cruelty under etiquette, and how to use that same etiquette as a blade. Clara also began visiting Sophie more often. One afternoon, Sophie squeezed her hand and said, "You sound like yourself again." Clara nearly broke down. She was not chasing beauty to please Lorenzo. She was gathering power because she never wanted to beg anyone again. This was where Lorenzo's arrogance became useful. While he was busy defending his throne, Clara learned the rhythm of his house, the study door, the guard's shifts. The nights when stress made him drink too much and forget small things. He believed his home was impenetrable, so he had grown careless inside it. Clara's gift was memory. As a caterer, she had used it to remember banquet seating charts, allergy lists, wine pairings, and impossible drink orders. As a bookkeeping student, she had used it to catch errors no one else saw. Now she used it on Lorenzo's empire. She did not steal files. She read, remembered, and left everything exactly as she found it. Night after night, Clara studied shipping fests, the shell companies, payroll patterns, and the strange routes money took when men wanted it hidden. Elaine had taught her what legitimate books should look like. Lorenzo's records showed her what corruption looked like when it wore a suit. In the 7th month, she found the piece that mattered most. A ledger exposing the financial weak spots of Declan Gallagher's Irish syndicate, including the very pressure points Lorenzo planned to use later. She also discovered the escrow account, holding the $5 million bet. Sitting alone in Lorenzo's leather chair, with a penlight barely cutting through the dark, Clara smiled for the first time in weeks. Not because she had won, because now she knew where to begin. By the 11th month of the contract, only 30 days remained before Clara was supposed to disappear with a payout and a gag order. Before that, she and Lorenzo had to attend the biggest event of the season, a gala at the Field Museum, neutral ground where mobsters, politicians, and society donors pretended to care about art. Lorenzo had barely spoken to her in 6 weeks. Still, 2 nights earlier, Clara had seen him standing outside Sophia's hospital room, speaking quietly with her doctor about a new treatment option. He left before Clara could confront him. That small act did not erase what he had done. It only made him harder to hate cleanly. On the morning of the gala, Mrs. Gable threw a garment bag onto Clara's bed and said the boss had chosen her dress. Inside the bag was a high-necked, shapeless taffeta gown in a dull gray that seemed designed to make her disappear. It was not clothing. It was an instruction. Clara carried it to the fireplace, struck a match, and watched it burn until the fabric curled into black ash. At 8:15 that evening, Matteo stood sweating in the foyer, because Lorenzo was waiting outside in the armored car, and Lorenzo hated being late. He called up the stairs, telling Mrs. Costa to hurry. A calm voice answered that she was ready. Matteo looked up. The voice did not belong to the timid woman the staff had learned to ignore. It was steady, cool, and certain. Then he saw her and forgot whatever he had planned to say. Coming down the sweeping marble staircase was not the quiet woman he remembered from City Hall. Clara had lost 70 pounds. But the weight was not the real transformation. The real change was in the way she moved. She wore a custom blood-red Alexander McQueen gown that fit her perfectly, with a daring neckline and a slit that showed strong, toned legs. Her dark hair, once hidden in a messy bun, fell down her back in sleek waves. She had not become smaller. She had become impossible to overlook. Her lips were deep crimson, and her eyes were calm in a way that made even Matteo uneasy. She looked expensive, yes, but more than that, she looked awake. At the bottom of the stairs, she paused to pull on long black silk gloves and told Matteo gently to close his mouth before he swallowed a fly. He stammered, which would have been funny if the moment had not felt so dangerous. Outside, the wind came hard off Lake Michigan. Lorenzo sat in the back of his Bentley, scrolling through his phone, impatient and distracted. When the door opened, cold air swept in, carrying the scent of Clara's perfume. Without looking up, he snapped that she was late. Still staring at his screen, Lorenzo said he had told her to wear the gray dress. Then he looked up. The rest of the sentence died before it left his mouth. His phone slipped from his hand and hit the floorboards. For once, Lorenzo Costa had no immediate answer. He stared at the woman sliding into the seat beside him, trying and failing to connect her with the frightened caterer from the poker room or the silent wife he had ignored for 11 months. He saw the dress first, then the posture, then the eyes. The eyes stopped him. They were not begging anymore. "Hello, Lorenzo," Clara said softly. Her voice was smooth, almost kind, but there was steel beneath it. She held his gaze without blinking. "I decided gray was my color," she said. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. Shock crossed his face first, followed by suspicion. Then something darker he did not bother to hide. He reached toward her bare shoulder, as if he needed proof she was real. "Clara," he said, his voice rough. "What is this?" She moved his hand away with 2 gloved fingers. "This is what happens when you stop assuming you know what you bought." The words struck him harder than he expected. For the rest of the drive, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was not empty anymore. It was loaded. The power inside that car had shifted, and Lorenzo felt it even if he did not understand it yet. When they reached the red carpet, cameras flashed from every direction. Lorenzo stepped out and offered his hand, more out of habit than warmth. Clara ignored it. She stepped out on her own, steady and graceful, her red gown catching the light like a warning. The crowd quieted. Even the photographers hesitated before the flashes came harder. As she and Lorenzo climbed the stone steps into the museum, the reaction spread through the room. Conversation slowed. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Every eye turned toward Clara, and this time, no one looked through her. Near the giant T-Rex skeleton, Declan Gallagher was holding court with a glass of champagne and his usual arrogant smirk. Then Clara caught his eye from across the room. She did not look away. She gave him a small, cold smile, one that held no embarrassment, no apology, and no fear. Declan's smirk faltered, and the champagne glass slipped from his hand, shattering against the marble floor. The sound cracked through the room. For a few seconds, no one moved. Declan looked down at the broken glass, then back at Clara, and the color in his face changed. He understood enough to be afraid, but not enough to keep his mouth shut. Men who had seen violence without blinking stood silent, watching the woman in red. Clara did not flinch. Her chin stayed lifted, her gown pooling around her like spilled wine. Declan tried to recover, but he recovered badly. His face moved from shock to anger, then to the forced amusement of a man who knew people were watching. He stepped away from the dinosaur skeleton and rebuilt his sneer piece by piece. It did not fit him as well as it had before. Lorenzo saw that. So did every boss, wife, lawyer, and politician in the room. Declan had lost control for 1 second. And in their world, 1 second was enough to change the balance. Declan looked Clara over and laughed too loudly. He said he almost did not recognize her without a serving tray in her hands. Then he added something about how expensive tailoring could perform miracles. It was a cheap attempt to drag her back into the old version of herself, and everyone heard it. Behind Clara, Lorenzo's jaw clenched. His hand moved slightly toward the inside of his tuxedo jacket, not enough for the guests to notice, but enough for Matteo to tense across the room. Clara noticed, too. She did not need saving. She lifted one hand just enough to stop Lorenzo without looking at him. Then she walked toward Declan. The crowd parted around her. Clara stopped close enough to see the burst veins near Declan's eyes and smell the whiskey on his breath. Genevieve's voice echoed in her mind, "Never rush when the room is already waiting for you." Clara spoke softly so everyone had to lean in to hear. She told him it was strange. He had spent so much time staring at her body that he had missed the more interesting thing. She had been listening. Declan's grin tightened. Clara tilted her head and asked how his profit margins were holding up at the Canaryville docks. The change in his face was small, but Clara saw it. Lorenzo saw it too. Clara continued before Declan could interrupt. She mentioned the stevedores' union and the strike planned for midnight Thursday over hazard pay. Then she brought up container 42, packed with illegal pharmaceuticals and waiting at the port. It would be unfortunate, she said, if the port authority became curious, while his men were too distracted to move it. The air seemed to thin around them. Declan's men shifted their hands toward their jackets. Matteo shifted too. Lorenzo stepped half a pace closer, ready for the room to explode. Declan tried to laugh, but the sound cracked. He called her crazy. Clara smiled, not because it was funny, but because he had chosen the weakest answer. She stepped closer and lowered her voice. "You should also take a better look at O'Shea," she said. He's been skimming from your sports books for 6 months and sending it through a Cayman shell account ending in 8842. Declan went still. That detail was not gossip. It was not a lucky guess. It was a knife placed exactly between his ribs. Clara told him he was bleeding money and blaming the wrong people. Declan's eyes moved quickly toward one of his own men. Then back to her. Fear flashed before he could hide it. Clara let him sit inside that fear for 3 seconds. Then she turned away as if he had become boring. Lorenzo stared at his wife as if he were seeing her for the first time, and hating himself for how late he was. This was not the quiet woman he had filed away in the background of his life. This was someone who had been watching the whole room while everyone else laughed. Clara turned to him and offered her arm with perfect calm. "Lorenzo," she said, "I am suddenly finding the company here very tiring. Take me to the VIP lounge." He did not answer at first. Then he nodded, let her gloved hand slide through his arm, and walked beside her. Behind them, Declan stood red-faced and shaken, while the rest of Chicago's underworld tried to understand what had just happened. For the rest of the night, Clara did not simply look beautiful, she operated. She spoke to a crooked alderman about zoning delays. She complimented a judge's wife, while quietly making the woman nervous. She remembered names, debts, rumors, and seating arrangements with the same terrifying precision she had once used to serve drinks. Lorenzo stayed close, no longer from duty, but because he could not look away. The moment they entered the armored Bentley and the privacy glass slid up, the performance ended. Lorenzo grabbed Clara by the shoulders and demanded to know who she was working for. His eyes were wild with suspicion. Was she with the FBI? Was she planted by Declan? How did she know things even his own men barely understood? Clara did not scream. She looked down at his hands digging into her skin, then slowly raised her eyes. "Take your hands off me." "Lorenzo," she said. Her voice was low, steady, and completely unafraid. That frightened him more than panic would have. He released her and backed away, breathing hard. Clara smoothed the fabric of her dress where his fingers had wrinkled it. "I am not FBI. I am not Declan's plant. I am your wife," she said, "the one you left alone in a house full of locked doors and careless people." Lorenzo frowned, still trying to catch up. Clara leaned back against the seat. "You assumed I was furniture. Your mistake was forgetting that furniture stays in the room and hears everything." Lorenzo's face went colder. "What did you read?" he asked. Clara began listing things. The hard drive in his desk drawer, the password based on his mother's maiden name, and the year she immigrated. The duplicate keys Mrs. Gable kept in the linen closet. The old emergency access protocol his accountant had never disabled. Lorenzo's mouth tightened with each detail. Clara told him about her memory, about the night classes, about years of remembering orders and invoices. Because mistakes cost money she never had. She had not hacked like a movie villain. She had watched, studied, and understood the systems he was too arrogant to hide properly. "You broke into my study," he said at last. "I walked into your study," Clara corrected softly. "You were the one who left the door unlocked." She held his stare. She knew about the bribes to Alderman Davis. She knew which casinos were over-leveraged. She knew which port schedules made him vulnerable. And she knew about the $5 million sitting in escrow at the Bank of Geneva, waiting to reward the men who had laughed at her. That finally stripped the anger from Lorenzo's face and left something closer to fear. Clara watched it happen. A year ago, she might have mistaken his fear for power. Now she knew better. Fear was simply what power looked like when it started to slip. Lorenzo tried to speak, but Clara cut him off before he could shape the lie. "The contract ends in 30 days. She said, looking out at the city lights through the tinted window. "Until then, things will be different. You will not hide me. You will not dismiss me in public. You will not let your staff treat me like a stain on your floor." Her voice stayed calm, which made the words feel heavier. "And if you forget, I will not cry on a balcony again. I will use what I know." Enzo studied her profile, searching for the soft spot he had relied on for 11 months. He could not find it. Clara said, turning back to him, "I will take your empire apart piece by piece." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. By the next morning, the Costa estate felt different. Lorenzo had not slept. He spent the night changing passwords, locking safes, calling accountants, and tearing apart his own study as if the walls had betrayed him. But nothing was missing. The files were in place. The accounts were untouched. That was what made it worse. Clara had not stolen a thing. She had carried the important parts away in her head. At 9 in the morning, Lorenzo came out of his study bloodshot and furious, his tie hanging loose. He found the house in chaos. Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper who had treated Clara like an unwanted burden for 11 months, stood shaking in the foyer with 2 maids behind her. Lorenzo snapped, demanding to know what was happening. Pale and flustered, Mrs. Gable said Mrs. Costa had ordered the staff to pack all her belongings from the East Wing. Lorenzo felt his chest tighten. For one sharp second, he imagined Clara going straight to the authorities, and to his irritation, that thought bothered him more than it should have. "Where is she?" he demanded. Mrs. Gable swallowed and said Mrs. Costa had found the East Wing too drafty, so she was moving into the master suite with him. Lorenzo stared at the housekeeper. Clara was not running. She was taking the center of his life and making it hers. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed with a blocked number. When he answered, Arthur, his financial manager, sounded as if he had been running. "We have a serious problem, Lorenzo." Arthur was talking about the Geneva account, the one holding the $5 million from the Gallagher wager. Lorenzo already knew before the words came that Clara had moved first. Still, hearing it was different. Arthur's voice cracked. "It's gone." Lorenzo froze. Transfers that large required layered authorization, and the physical key fob was still in his pocket. Arthur explained that the bank had received an emergency authorization packet at 6 in the morning. It used Lorenzo's digital signature and an old backdoor protocol created years earlier for crisis transfers. The kind of thing a cautious man builds, then forgets because he thinks no one else will ever find it. Lorenzo's demanded to know where the money had gone. Arthur hesitated. It had not gone to a shell company. It had not gone overseas. The entire $5 million had been donated to Mercy Hospital's pediatric cancer wing, and the press was already calling Lorenzo one of Chicago's most generous private donors. Lorenzo slowly lowered the phone. Mercy Hospital was where Sophie was being treated. Clara had not taken the money for herself. She had taken the filthiest money in the room, the money wagered on her humiliation, and pinned it to something no one could publicly attack. If Lorenzo tried to claw it back, he would look like a monster stealing from sick children. If he left it alone, she won. Either way, the world would believe the donation was his idea. For the first time in a long while, Lorenzo had been outplayed without a single shot fired. He hung up on Arthur and headed upstairs. He took the stairs 2 at a time, fury pushing him forward. Beneath it was something he did not want to name. Not admiration exactly, not yet, but close enough to unsettle him. He pushed open the heavy oak doors to the master suite, expecting panic or tears. Instead, Clara sat calmly in his vintage leather chair, looking out over the gray waters of Lake Michigan. She wore an emerald silk robe, her dark hair neatly arranged, and she was drinking from his private bottle of Macallan 25, the same kind of scotch that had started all of this 11 months earlier. She looked up as if he had arrived for breakfast, not war. "Good morning, Lorenzo," she said, taking another slow sip. He shut the door behind him and crossed the room like a storm. "You stole $5 million from me," he growled. Clara rested the glass on her knee. "No," she said. "I returned it to the people. It should have helped in the first place." He stared at her, furious because the answer was clean, and he had no clean way to fight it. The money had been a joke to him, a point of pride, a number in a game between men. Clara had turned it into hospital beds, medicine, and time for children like Sophie. Lorenzo could not pretend the difference did not matter. He leaned in close, trapping her in the chair. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. As he told her, he could make her disappear and leave no trace anyone would dare question. It was the kind of threat that had worked on stronger people than Clara. She did not blink. Instead, she reached up and lightly touched the line of his jaw with cool fingers. The gesture stunned him, because it was not fearful. It was deliberate. "No, you won, T," she said. Her certainty made the room feel smaller. Lorenzo should have pulled away. He did not. Some part of him had already understood, what his pride refused to admit. Clara had not simply survived his world, she had learned how it breathed. She told him that at 5 a.m., 5 minutes after the money cleared, she sent an encrypted release package to 3 journalists, 1 federal contact and a lawyer Elaine trusted. If Clara was harmed, if she vanished, or if she failed to enter a passcode every 24 hours, the documents would go out. Bribes, port schedules, safe houses, offshore accounts, enough to destroy him, or at least bury him in federal attention for years. Lorenzo stood perfectly still. Clara watched the calculation happen behind his eyes and knew the exact moment he accepted the truth. She was no longer the woman trapped in his house. She was the person holding the match. "You bought me because you thought I was easy to control," Clara said. "You were wrong. But I'm not here to hand you to the FBI. Not yet." Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. She leaned closer. "Declan Gallagher is unstable. Broke in places he's hiding from his own men. And arrogant enough to walk straight into a trap if a woman sets it." Lorenzo let out a humorless laugh. "Declan wanted to sit quietly after last night. He'll come for both of us." Clara nodded once. "Then let him. He started with humiliation. We answer with strategy." Outside, waves struck the shore in the cold morning light. Lorenzo looked at her and, against his will, began to listen. Lorenzo respected power, even when it came from a place he had been foolish enough to overlook. He stepped back, still angry, but no longer pretending she was harmless. "Declan does to just have whiskey and temper," he said. "He has men who like violence and nothing left to lose." Clara did not argue. She took another sip of scotch and told him that made him predictable, not invincible. By 9 that morning, the dockworkers' union had walked off the job, exactly as she had expected. That was not magic. It was weeks of reading payroll complaints, hazard reports, and cash flow delays. Declan's empire was already cracking. She had simply learned where to press. Clara explained that Declan's cargo was sitting exposed at the port, while his sportsbooks were bleeding from the inside, because O'Shea had been stealing for months. If Lorenzo hit blindly, Declan would become a martyr to his men. If they let Declan suspect betrayal from within, he would do half the damage himself. She stood, the silk robe whispering against the floor. "You don't need a war. Lorenzo, you need patience." Lorenzo looked at her, then at the glass in her hand, then back at her face. The woman he had once dismissed had just given him a cleaner strategy than any of his captains. His voice dropped. "What do you want from this?" "You have leverage," Lorenzo said. "You could ruin me right now. Why help me?" Clara stepped closer, her expression unreadable. "Because ruining you only gives me revenge," she said. "I want more than that." She thought of the poker room, the balcony, the cold meals, the staff whispering, the way people had her Sideslets had permission. "I want Declan to lose everything he built on arrogance. I want the men who laughed in that room to understand they misjudged me. And when this is over, I want a seat at the table, not a payout and a quiet exit." Lorenzo studied her for a long moment. He did not smile, but something like respect moved behind his eyes. Before Lorenzo could answer, his phone buzzed. It was Matteo. Tires screeched in the background, and his voice was tight. The press was tearing into the hospital donation, but that was no longer their biggest problem. Declan's crew had hit 2 South Loop casinos before dawn, shooting out windows and setting fire to the back offices. Then Matteo added the part that made Clara go still. A suspicious man had been seen near Sophia's hospital floor, asking questions about her room. Declan had finally found the one place Clara was still soft. Lorenzo's face changed instantly. He ordered Matteo to move guards to Mercy, lock down the estate, and get Clara to the safe house. Then he looked at her and said, "Partner, this just became personal." The next 48 hours were controlled chaos. They hid in a secure underground bunker beneath an old meatpacking plant, while Mercy Hospital went under quiet protection. For the first time in his life, Lorenzo did not bark over everyone in the room. He listened. Clara built a command center with 3 encrypted laptops, while Elaine fed her documents through a secure channel, and Genevieve managed the public narrative from downtown. But Declan was not as careless as Clara had hoped. He leaked a forged federal memo tying Lorenzo's hospital donation to drug money, then sent a message with one photo. Sophie's hospital door, taken from the hallway. Clara's hands shook for the first time in months. That photo nearly broke her focus. Lorenzo saw it happen. Clara stared at the screen, her face draining of color, and for one awful second, she looked like the woman from the balcony again. Declan had aimed well. He did not have to touch Sophie to remind Clara that he could. Lorenzo ordered a strike team to Mercy, but Clara stopped him. A shootout at a children's hospital was exactly the kind of chaos Declan wanted. She forced herself to breathe, then checked the reflection in the photo, the hallway clock, the distorted badge on the man's jacket. It was not a gunman, it was a private investigator. Declan was fishing, trying to make her panic. Clara wiped her eyes once, then went back to work. Clara changed the plan. Instead of only freezing Declan's vulnerable accounts, she fed his forged memo back through 3 channels until it pointed toward O'Shea. Then she opened a trail of transfers tied to O'Shea's stolen money. Fake vendors, small withdrawals, a Cayman account, and a property purchase in his cousin S. name. She sent the packet to Declan's private inbox and to 2 of his most paranoid captains. In 5 minutes, she said, her voice still rough from fear. Declan learns his right hand has been robbing him and forging documents behind his back. In 7, his captains start wondering who else knew. Lorenzo let out a low whistle. You ruthless. Clara turned to him. No, I am scared. There's a difference. Neither of them moved. The bunker hummed around them. Danger, exhaustion, anger, and unwanted trust pressed into the small space between their bodies. Lorenzo looked at Clara as if he finally understood that courage was not the absence of fear. It was what she did with it. Sophie is safe, he said quietly. I swear it. Clara wanted to hate how much those words steadied her. He reached for her. Slower this time, giving her room to refuse. She did not. The kiss was not gentle, and it was not simple. It carried a year of resentment, fear, fascination, and the strange relief of being seen clearly. When they pulled apart, the joke from the poker room felt dead. Declan's counterattack failed, and after that, his control collapsed fast. The forged memo backfired. O'Shea vanished. 2 captains turned on each other, and 3 shipments were seized within 24 hours. The Irish mob was not defeated by one clever trick. It was taken apart through fear, debt, betrayal, and every weak point Declan had ignored while laughing at people beneath him. Cornered and desperate, he demanded a meeting, offering to surrender what he had left in exchange for his life. They agreed to meet at midnight inside a ruined steel mill on the south side. Rain poured through the rusted roof, ticking against the concrete floor. Declan thought he was coming to negotiate with Lorenzo Costa. He arrived with only 2 loyal men left, looking as if he had aged 15 years since the gala. The Tom Ford suit he once bragged about now hung loose on his frame. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hands shook around a briefcase stuffed with deeds, account keys, and whatever scraps of power he could still trade. He had expected Lorenzo to appear with an army. Instead, there was a single spotlight, a rusted desk, and Clara. She sat behind it in a sharp black Saint Laurent suit, legs crossed, a suppressed 9mm resting beside her glass of water. Her face was calm, but Declan noticed the one thing he could still use. She had come alone, because he had threatened her sister. Behind her, Matteo stood in the shadows. Lorenzo was nowhere to be seen. Declan stopped dead, then forced a smile. "Where is Costa?" he asked. "Or did he send the secretary because she's easier to scare?" Clara did not answer. Declan leaned closer and said Sophia's name softly, like a blade sliding from a sleeve. Matteo's hand moved toward his gun, but Clara raised one finger. She had expected this. "Lorenzo is busy taking over the Canaryville docks," she said. "The ones you used to own. And Sophie is under better protection than you ever gave your own children." Declan's smile cracked. Clara stood and picked up the pistol. "Say it properly, Declan. What was I to you? A cow, a pig, a joke?" Her heels clicked against the concrete as she came around the desk. She reminded him of the bet, the $5 million, the laughter. and the way he had thought her humiliation was worth turning into entertainment. Then she told him what had really happened. She had followed his money. She had exposed O'Shea. She had turned his forged memo into proof of betrayal, broken his union pressure, split his captains, and cut off the roots that kept him alive. The gun stayed aimed at his chest, steady in her hand. Her terms were simple. He would put the briefcase on the desk, sign over every remaining business, and take a one-way flight from O'Hare to Dublin before sunrise. "If you come back to Chicago," Clara said, "or if you send anyone after me, Sophie, Lorenzo, or anyone under our protection, I will not use paperwork next time." Declan looked at the gun, then at her face, and finally understood that the person he had dismissed had become the person deciding whether he walked out alive. His shoulders sagged. The last of the performance left him. Shaking, he stepped forward, placed the briefcase on the rusted desk, and signed the documents with a frantic, ugly signature. No one laughed now. When he walked out into the pouring rain, he was not a king, not a rival, not even a threat. He was a man who had learned too late that contempt can be expensive. Clara watched him disappear into the darkness, then lowered the gun. A slow clap echoed from the iron catwalk above. Lorenzo descended the metal stairs, his eyes fixed on her with something deeper than hunger and more dangerous than gratitude. He glanced at the signed papers on the desk, the documents that made him the undisputed king of Chicago. But the paperwork barely held his attention. Clara did. 5 days later, on day 365, she stood in the grand office of Costa Enterprises, looking out at the skyline. The city had changed. Maybe she had changed enough to see it clearly. The papers were calling them Chicago's most unexpected power couple. The feds had backed off for now, with no clean paper trails strong enough to build the case they wanted. The Gallagher territory had been absorbed, with surprising little public noise. Then the heavy mahogany doors opened, and Lorenzo stepped inside carrying 2 things: a bottle of Macallan 25 and the original marriage contract. He poured 2 glasses and handed one to her. His voice was low, but not cold. "Today the contract is fulfilled," he said. "The $2 million is already in your private account. Sophia's care remains covered. No matter what you decide, you are free to walk out of here. Clara, no threats, no conditions." There it was, the door she had once dreamed of opening. Clara looked at the contract, then at him, humiliated her, and left her alone for months. She would never pretend otherwise. But he was also the man who had listened when it mattered, protected Sophie without asking for credit, and stepped back enough to let Clara stand in front. Lorenzo did not beg. He placed the contract on the desk, took out a silver Zippo, and held the flame near the edge. "I don't want this to be what keeps you here," he said. Clara watched the fire catch, watched the paper curl, watched the old arrangement turn to ash. Lorenzo stepped closer, careful now, not claiming her by force. "I want my wife," he said, "but only if she chooses to stay." Clara looked at the ashes, then at the city beyond the glass. She thought of the girl who had run from the poker room, with tears in her eyes. She thought of Sophie's hospital door in that photo, of the balcony, the gray dress burning, the first time Lorenzo had finally listened. She was not that frightened girl anymore, and every inch of power she had now had been earned the hard way. Slowly she smiled and wrapped her arms around Lorenzo's neck. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered, "but I'm not standing behind you either. We run this together." A cruel $5 million joke had created a woman no one in Chicago would ever laugh at again. Clara did not simply survive the humiliation. She turned it into a throne. Every mafia boss story is not only about power, money, revenge, or fear. Beneath the violence and darkness, there is often a painful human lesson about choices, consequences, loyalty, family, and the price of ambition. This story reminds us that no matter how powerful a person becomes, no one can escape the truth forever. Hundreds of people, and make others tremble at the sound of his name. But if his heart is empty, his victory is never complete. The mafia boss in this story represents a man who built his life on control. He believed that fear was stronger than love, that silence was safer than honesty, and that power could protect him from pain. For years, He may have won every battle in the streets, in business, and among his enemies. But the most important battle was never outside him. It was inside his own heart. That is where he truly lost himself. One of the most meaningful lessons from this story is that power without morality becomes a prison. Many people dream of becoming rich, respected, or feared. They think success means having control over others. But real success is not measured by how many people obey you. It is measured by how many lives you protect, how much peace you create, and how much good remains after you are gone. The Mafia boss had money, influence, and protection, but he did not have peace. His life shows us that a person can be surrounded by luxury and still feel completely alone. Another important lesson is that loyalty is valuable, but blind loyalty can destroy lives. In the world of crime, loyalty is often treated like the highest law. People are expected to follow orders without question. Never mean giving up your conscience. A loyal person does not simply protect someone's secrets. A loyal person also has the courage to stop someone from destroying themselves. This story teaches us that loyalty without honesty is dangerous. Real loyalty should be connected to truth, respect, and moral responsibility. The story also shows the heavy cost of revenge. Revenge often feels powerful in the beginning. It gives a person the illusion that pain can be answered with pain, but revenge rarely heals anything. Instead, it creates a chain of suffering that keeps growing. One act of revenge leads to another. One betrayal leads to another. In the end, everyone loses something. The Mafia boss may have believed that revenge would restore his honor, but what it truly did was steal his humanity piece by piece. This is a powerful reminder that forgiveness is not weakness. Sometimes, forgiveness is the strongest decision a person can make because it breaks the cycle of hatred. Family is another central lesson in this kind of story. Many mafia bosses claim they do everything for family. They say they commit crimes to protect the people they love. But protection without honesty can become another form of harm. A family does not only need money or security. A family needs trust, emotional safety, and love that is not poisoned by fear. If a father, husband, brother, or son becomes powerful but loses the ability to show tenderness, then his family may live in a beautiful house, but still feel trapped inside it. This story reminds us that children and loved ones often pay the price for the choices of powerful men. The mafia boss may think his decisions only affect his enemies, but every secret, every violent act, and every betrayal leaves a shadow over the innocent people around him. That is why one of the strongest educational messages is this: before making a decision, we must ask ourselves who will suffer because of it. A selfish choice may bring temporary success, but it can create long-term pain for the people we love most. Another meaningful point is the danger of pride. Pride can make a person refuse to apologize, refuse to change, and refuse to admit they are wrong. The mafia boss may have spent years believing that saying sorry would make him look weak, but in reality, the ability to apologize is a sign of strength. It takes courage to face the damage we have caused. It takes maturity to admit that we hurt someone, and it takes true character to change before it is too late. The story also teaches that redemption is possible, but it always requires sacrifice. A person cannot simply say they have changed. They must prove it through action. Redemption means accepting responsibility, protecting the innocent, telling the truth, and sometimes losing everything that was built on lies. For a mafia boss, redemption may mean walking away from power, exposing corruption, saving someone he once endangered, or choosing love over control. The path to redemption is painful, because it forces a person to confront the worst parts of themselves. But it is also the only path that can lead to peace. From a human perspective, this story is powerful because it shows that even the hardest heart can still feel pain. Behind the cold eyes of a mafia boss, there may be regret, loneliness, childhood wounds, or a deep fear of being betrayed. This does not excuse his actions, but it helps us understand that broken people often break others when they never learn how to heal. The educational value here is important. Pain should not become an excuse to hurt people. Instead, pain should become a reason to grow, to seek wisdom, and to choose a better path. For viewers, the lesson is not to admire the criminal lifestyle, but to understand its emptiness. The suits, cars, mansions, and power may look attractive from the outside, but behind them there is often fear, guilt, and loss. A life built on violence can never bring true happiness. A life built on lies can never bring true freedom. And a life built on fear can never create real love. In the end, the story of a mafia boss is really a warning. It warns us that every choice has a consequence. It warns us that money cannot buy peace. It warns us that fear cannot replace respect. It warns us that revenge cannot heal a wounded heart. Most importantly, it reminds us that the greatest power a person can have is not the power to control others, but the power to control themselves. The deepest lesson is simple but meaningful. Choose character over pride, love over control, truth over silence, and forgiveness over revenge. No matter how dark a person's past may be, change is possible when they are willing to face the truth. But the longer someone waits, the higher the price becomes. A mafia boss may win the streets, defeat his enemies, and build an empire, but if he loses his soul, he has lost everything. True strength is not found in violence. True strength is found in responsibility, compassion, humility, and the courage to become better before it is too late.